What would you do if you realized too late that every step you just took led you straight into a trap designed to wipe you out completely? No warning, no second chances, just the cold realization that the mission was never meant to succeed, and you were the bait. Before we begin, take a second and tell me where you're watching from right now. Drop it in the comments. And if you love intense, real-life inspired military stories like this, make sure you hit subscribe, because what you're about to hear will stay with you. This is not just a story about war. This is a story about survival, instinct, and the unbreakable will of Filipino soldiers who refused to die quietly. Deep in hostile territory, cut off from support, surrounded by an enemy force that outnumbered them 10-1, a small Filipino unit walked straight into what should have been their final mission. But what happened next? It shocked even their enemies. Because instead of being erased, they turned the trap into a battlefield and rewrote the ending. It began with intelligence, fragmented, rushed, and dangerously incomplete. Reports of insurgent movement in a remote jungle region had been coming in for days. Villages had gone silent. Patrol units had vanished. Something big was building, but no one knew exactly what. The mission seemed simple on paper. Send in a small reconnaissance team, confirm enemy presence, and extract. Standard procedure. Low risk. At least, that's what command believed. The team selected for the operation was composed of experienced Filipino soldiers, men who had seen combat, who understood terrain, and who trusted each other with their lives. They moved fast, lightly equipped, and with precision. But from the moment they crossed into enemy-controlled territory, something felt off. The jungle was too quiet. No wildlife. No movement. Just an eerie stillness that clung to the air like a warning no one could quite explain. As they pushed deeper into the jungle, the signs became impossible to ignore. Tracks, fresh ones, far too many for a small insurgent group. Makeshift observation points hidden in the trees. Discarded food supplies that suggested a much larger force had been stationed there for days, maybe weeks. This wasn't a scouting ground. It was a staging area. And they had just walked straight into it. The team leader halted the unit immediately. Radios were checked. Coordinates confirmed. But before they could even begin to pull back, the first shot rang out. Then another. And another. Within seconds, the silence of the jungle exploded into chaos. Gunfire erupted from multiple directions. They weren't just spotted, they were surrounded. The trap had been set perfectly. And they had triggered it. Instinct took over. The soldiers dove for cover as gunfire erupted around them. They returned fire with controlled bursts, staying focused despite the chaos. But it quickly became clear. This wasn't a random ambush. This was coordinated. The enemy had high ground, overlapping fields of fire, and superior numbers. Every escape route had been anticipated. Every movement countered. The team was pinned down, isolated, and outmatched. But panic was not an option. The team leader made a split-second decision. Hold position, assess, and find a weakness. Through the chaos, they began to notice patterns. The enemy fire wasn't random. It followed rhythm. Reload intervals. Communication signals. It was organized, but not perfect. Minutes felt like hours as the firefight intensified. Ammunition was limited. Communication with base was unstable. Reinforcements were too far to arrive in time. They were on their own. But instead of collapsing under pressure, something else happened. The unit adapted. They stopped reacting and started thinking. One soldier identified a slight delay in fire coming from the eastern flank. Another noticed that the enemy forces were relying heavily on centralized command. That meant one thing: disrupt the command structure, and the entire operation could fall apart. It was risky, almost suicidal, but it was the only chance they had. The plan was simple, but brutal. A small group would break formation and push toward the enemy's command position, drawing fire and creating confusion. Meanwhile, the rest of the team would reposition, exploiting the gaps left behind. It required perfect timing, absolute trust, and zero hesitation. As the signal was given, the soldiers moved. Not back, but forward. Straight into the heart of the trap. Gunfire intensified immediately. Bullets tore through foliage, striking inches from their positions. But the aggression caught the enemy off guard. This wasn't how trapped units behave. This wasn't retreat. This was a counterattack. The jungle turned into a battlefield of movement and deception. Smoke grenades were deployed, distorting visibility. Rapid flanking maneuvers forced the enemy to split their focus. And just like that, the advantage began to shift. What was once a coordinated assault started to fracture. Orders became confused. Positions overlap. And in that chaos, the Filipino soldiers found their opening. One by one, they began taking down key enemy positions. Pushing deeper, dismantling the trap from the inside. At the center of it all was the command unit, hidden, protected, and heavily guarded. Reaching it meant crossing open ground under intense fire. But turning back was no longer an option. The soldiers moved with precision, covering each other, advancing inch by inch. Every step forward was earned. Every second counted. And then they reached it. A brief, violent clash followed, close range, relentless, decisive. And when it was over, the command structure was gone. The effect was immediate. Enemy fire became sporadic. Coordination collapsed. What was once a deadly, organized trap turned into scattered resistance. The soldiers seized the moment. They pushed outward, reclaiming ground, securing escape routes. The same terrain that had been used against them was now working in their favor. The trap had been reversed. But survival was not yet guaranteed. Ammunition was critically low. Several soldiers were injured. And the enemy, though disorganized, was still present in large numbers. Extraction was the next challenge, and it wouldn't be easy. The team regrouped, prioritizing the wounded, redistributing supplies, and preparing for the final push. Every decision mattered. Every mistake could cost lives. Communication with base was finally re-established, but the situation had changed. Reinforcements were still too far. Air support was unavailable due to terrain conditions. The unit had to extract themselves, alone, using what they had left. The route chosen was risky, narrow, exposed, and likely monitored. But it was the fastest path out. And speed was now their greatest weapon. They moved quickly, but carefully. Every sound mattered. Every shadow was a potential threat. The jungle, once silent, was now alive again, but this time with uncertainty. The enemy no longer controlled the battlefield, and that uncertainty created hesitation. The soldiers used it. They stayed unpredictable, untraceable, always one step ahead. As they neared the extraction point, resistance surged one final time, sudden, violent, and determined to stop them at all costs. It was desperate, disorganized, but still deadly, as the enemy threw everything they had left into one last attempt to wipe them out. But this time, something had changed. The soldiers were no longer trapped, no longer reacting. They had taken control of the battlefield. They moved with confidence, with coordination, with a level of precision that turned chaos into calculated action. And they fought like it, relentless, focused, and unbreakable, pouring every last ounce of strength, skill, and will into the fight to survive. And then, just like that, it was over. The gunfire faded, the chaos settled, and against everything stacked against them, the unit broke through. Extraction was successful, against all odds, against overwhelming force, against a trap so carefully designed it should have erased them completely. They survived, but it was more than survival. It was a victory carved out of sheer determination in the face of certain defeat. Not because they had more firepower. Not because reinforcements came. Not because the situation favored them in any way. But because they refused to accept the ending that had been written for them, and chose, instead, to rewrite it themselves. This wasn't just a battle. It was a turning point, a moment where everything could have ended, but didn't. A powerful reminder that even in the most hopeless situations, when all odds are stacked against you, mindset can change everything. Because courage isn't about not being afraid, it's about feeling that fear, and choosing to move forward anyway, no matter the cost. And sometimes, when there's no clear escape, no backup, no second chance, the only way out is through. If this story gave you chills, let me know in the comments. Where are you watching from, and what part hit you the hardest? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because stories like these aren't just told, they deserve to be remembered.